There are moments in life when everything you believed about someone shatters in an instant, and you realize that the person you trusted most was never who they pretended to be. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday afternoon in March, sitting in an office I had helped build, staring at evidence that proved my mentor, my boss, and the man I considered a second father had been systematically destroying my life for his own benefit. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I went from being the most loyal employee Jonathan Hartley ever had to becoming the architect of his complete professional destruction, I need to take you back to where it all began. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, in a neighborhood where opportunity wasn't handed to you on a silver platter. My father worked at a manufacturing plant for 32 years before his back gave out, and the company gave him a disability package that wouldn't cover 6 months of bills. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families on the other side of town, coming home with hands cracked and red, smelling like other people's laundry detergent. She used to tell me and my brother Danny that education was the only ladder that couldn't be kicked out from under us, and I believed her with every fiber of my being. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. Ohio State University, business administration, summa cum laude. I worked 3 jobs to pay for it because my parents couldn't afford to help, and I was too proud to drown in student loans like so many of my peers. During my senior year, I interned at a small marketing firm in Columbus, and that's where I discovered I had a gift for something I never expected. I could read people, I could walk into a room, assess the dynamics, understand what clients really wanted, even when they couldn't articulate it themselves, and craft strategies that spoke directly to their unspoken needs. After graduation, I moved to Chicago with $600 in my pocket and a determination that bordered on obsession. I worked my way up through 2 different agencies over the next 5 years, building a reputation as someone who delivered results without the ego that usually came attached to talent in the advertising world. I was known for being collaborative, for lifting up the people around me, for staying late not to show off, but because I genuinely loved the work. That's how Jonathan Hartley found me. It was October of 2017 when I received an email that would change the trajectory of my entire life. The subject line simply read, "Opportunity of a lifetime." And normally, I would have deleted something so obviously clickbait without a second thought. But the sender's name caught my attention. Hartley and Associates was a boutique consulting firm based in Boston that had been making waves in the industry for innovative brand transformation strategies. I had read about them in trade publications, studied their case studies, admired their work from afar. The email was from Jonathan himself, explaining that he had seen a presentation I gave at an industry conference in Minneapolis and was impressed by my approach to integrated marketing communications. He wanted to fly me to Boston for a meeting, all expenses paid, no strings attached. Even if nothing came of it, he wrote, he simply wanted to shake the hand of someone whose work he respected. I remember reading that email 3 times, convinced there had been some mistake. I was 28 years old, 5 years out of college, working as a senior account manager at a mid-sized agency where my biggest client was a regional grocery chain. Men like Jonathan Hartley didn't reach out to people like me, but I called the number in his signature, spoke to his assistant, and found myself on a plane to Boston the following week. The moment I walked into the Hartley and Associates offices, I understood why people talked about the company the way they did. It wasn't just the exposed brick and the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. It wasn't the carefully curated art on the walls or the gleaming conference rooms with their state-of-the-art technology. It was the energy. You could feel ambition in the air, creativity humming through the open workspace, people moving with purpose and passion. This was where things happened. This was where careers were made. Jonathan met me in the lobby himself, which I later learned was unusual. He was tall, over 6 feet, with silver threading through his dark hair in a way that made him look distinguished rather than old. His handshake was firm, his smile warm, and when he looked at you, you felt like you were the only person in the world who mattered. That was his gift, I would come to understand. He could make anyone feel special, valued, important. It was the most dangerous thing about him. We talked for 3 hours that first meeting. He wanted to know everything about my background, my approach to problem solving, my philosophy on client relationships. He shared his own story, how he had started the firm 15 years earlier with nothing but a business plan and a small inheritance from his grandmother, how he had built it into one of the most respected boutique consultancies on the East Coast. He talked about his wife Victoria, his 2 daughters, his belief that business should be about more than just profit. By the end of our conversation, he offered me a job as Vice President of Client Strategy, a title that felt laughably above my experience level, and a salary that was nearly double what I was making in Chicago. I told him I needed to think about it, and he respected that, telling me to take all the time I needed. But we both knew I was going to say yes. How could I not? I moved to Boston in January of 2018, and for the next 4 years, I poured everything I had into Hartley and Associates. I worked 60-hour weeks as a baseline, sometimes pushing to 80 when we were in the middle of a major project. I brought in new clients, retained existing ones at a rate that exceeded industry standards, mentored junior staff, and helped develop the firm's proprietary methodology that became our calling card in competitive pitches. Jonathan noticed. He rewarded me with promotions, bonuses, and increasing responsibility. By 2020, I was senior vice president and the heir apparent to the entire operation. Jonathan started including me in conversations about succession planning, talking about how he wanted to step back in the next few years and focus on his family, his philanthropy, the novel he always said he was going to write. He painted a picture of a future where I would run the company, where everything he had built would become mine to nurture and grow. I believed him. I believed every word. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that Jonathan Hartley had been playing a long game from the very beginning. Every opportunity he gave me, every responsibility he entrusted to me, every late-night conversation where he shared his wisdom and I shared my gratitude, all of it was part of a strategy so calculated, so patient, so fundamentally evil that it still makes me sick to think about it. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Before I tell you about the betrayal, I need you to understand the depth of my loyalty, the completeness of my trust, because without understanding what I gave him, you can't possibly understand what it meant when he took everything away. In the summer of 2019, my mother was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. I got the call on a Wednesday morning, standing in the lobby of our building with a coffee in my hand, and I remember the way the cup slipped from my fingers and shattered on the marble floor. Brown liquid spreading across the polished surface while people stared and I stood frozen. My brother's voice in my ear telling me that the doctors were optimistic, but it was going to be a long road. I walked into Jonathan's office 20 minutes later, still shaking, and told him I needed to take emergency leave. I didn't know how long, probably at least a few weeks, maybe longer. I expected understanding. What I got was something that, at the time, felt like the most profound act of kindness I had ever experienced. Jonathan canceled his entire afternoon schedule. He sat me down, gave me water, and let me talk. Then he told me not to worry about anything at the office. He would personally handle my accounts, make sure nothing fell through the cracks, ensure that when I came back, everything would be exactly as I left it. More than that, he insisted on paying for a private nurse to help my family during my mother's treatment. When I protested, he held up his hand and said that family takes care of family, and that's what we were. I flew to Ohio that night and spent the next 6 weeks helping my mother through her first rounds of chemotherapy. Every few days, Jonathan would call to check on me, to check on her. He sent flowers to the house, books to keep her occupied during the long hours of treatment, gift cards to restaurants so my father wouldn't have to worry about cooking. When I finally returned to Boston, my accounts were not only intact, but had actually grown. Jonathan had brought in 2 new clients by leveraging relationships I had built, and he immediately turned them over to me with full commission credit. How do you not trust someone after that? How do you not love them? My mother survived. She's been in remission for 3 years now, and every time I see her, I think about how Jonathan Hartley paid for the home care that made her treatment bearable. I think about the handwritten card he sent her, the one she still keeps in a frame on her dresser, that said, "Your son is one of the finest people I have ever known, and now I understand where he gets it from." That card is still on her dresser. I haven't told her the truth about the man who wrote it. I'm not sure I ever will. The first crack in my perfect world appeared in September of 2022. It was small, so small that I almost missed it entirely. We were in a meeting with a potential client, a healthcare technology startup, looking for help with their brand positioning meeting as they prepared for a major funding round. The CEO was a brilliant woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, and she had specifically requested a meeting with me after hearing about our work from a colleague. Jonathan insisted on joining the meeting, which was unusual. Normally, he trusted me to handle initial consultations on my own, stepping in only for final presentations or contract negotiations. But he said he wanted to see me in action, wanted to observe how far I had come since those early days. I was flattered. The meeting went exceptionally well. Dr. Chen and I connected immediately, bonding over our shared experience of being first-generation college graduates who had clawed our way into spaces that weren't designed for people like us. By the end of the hour, she was ready to sign. But then Jonathan asked if he could have a word with her privately, just to discuss some high-level strategic considerations. I assumed it was his standard closing technique, adding the weight of founder involvement to seal the deal. They talked for 45 minutes behind closed doors while I waited in the lobby, checking emails and feeling increasingly uneasy without understanding why. When Dr. Chen finally emerged, she shook my hand warmly, but there was something different in her eyes, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. She said she needed to discuss things with her board and would be in touch. She never called back. When I asked Jonathan what had happened in their private conversation, he shrugged and said that she had cold feet, that startups were often like that, promising everything in the heat of the moment and then losing their nerve when it was time to commit. He told me not to take it personally, that even the best salespeople lost deals sometimes. I accepted his explanation because why wouldn't I? He had never given me any reason to doubt him. But over the following months, the same pattern repeated itself with an uncomfortable frequency. Meetings I thought had gone well would mysteriously fall apart. Clients I had cultivated for months would suddenly go silent. Every time there was a reasonable explanation. The economy was uncertain, competition was fierce, decision makers had changed their priorities. Each individual instance made sense. It was only when I started looking at the pattern that something began to feel deeply, fundamentally wrong. Elena Vance was the one who opened my eyes, though she would later tell me she had been watching and waiting for almost a year before she felt she could trust me with what she knew. Elena had joined the firm as a financial analyst in 2020, hired to help us streamline our operations and improve profitability. She was young, quiet, and extraordinarily observant, the kind of person who noticed everything while appearing to notice nothing. I had always liked her, admired her work ethic and her sharp analytical mind, but we had never been particularly close. That changed on a Thursday evening in February of 2023. I was working late as usual when Elena appeared in my doorway with a file folder in her hands and an expression I couldn't quite read. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, assuming she wanted to discuss the budget projections for the upcoming quarter. Instead, she closed the door behind her, checked the window to make sure no one was passing in the hallway, and said something that made my blood run cold. "I need to show you something, but I need you to promise me that you'll hear me out completely before you react." I promised, though I had no idea what I was promising to. Elena opened the folder and spread its contents across my desk. Financial records, email printouts, meeting notes, calendar entries. At first, the documents seemed random, disconnected. But as she walked me through them, a picture began to emerge, and it was a picture that made me want to vomit. Over the past 3 years, Jonathan had been systematically sabotaging my client relationships. Every deal that had mysteriously fallen through, every relationship that had unexpectedly soured, could be traced back to private conversations where Jonathan had planted seeds of doubt about my competence, my reliability, my long-term commitment to the firm. He would mention, casually, that I was difficult to work with behind closed doors, that I had a temper, that there had been complaints from junior staff, that he was concerned about my drinking. I don't drink. I stopped when I was 22 after watching what alcohol did to my uncle. Jonathan knew this. He had praised me for my discipline, called it one of my many admirable qualities. But that wasn't the worst of it. Elena had discovered financial irregularities that suggested something far more sinister. Client payments that had been misallocated. Expenses billed under my name for things I had never authorized. A pattern of small discrepancies that, when combined, painted a picture of someone skimming money from the company. He's been setting you up, Elena said quietly. I don't know for how long or for what purpose, but everything I've found points to one conclusion. He's building a case against you. When he's ready, he's going to use it to destroy you. I wanted to argue with her. I wanted to find holes in her analysis, alternative explanations, anything that would allow me to preserve my belief in the man who had given me so much. But the evidence was undeniable. Every piece fit together like a puzzle I hadn't known I was trying to solve. Why? I finally asked. Why would he do this? I've given him everything. I've been nothing but loyal. Elena shook her head. I don't know. I've been trying to figure that out for months. All I know is that whatever's coming, you need to be prepared. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the wall, trying to reconcile two completely different versions of reality. In one version, I was the trusted protege of a generous mentor, poised to inherit a company I had helped build. In the other, I was the patsy in an elaborate scheme, a useful idiot being fattened for slaughter. I didn't sleep, I couldn't. My mind kept cycling through every interaction, every conversation, every moment of apparent kindness, searching for the truth hidden beneath the surface. By morning, I had made a decision. I needed more information. I needed to understand what was really happening before I could figure out how to respond. And so began the most difficult period of my life, a double existence where I continued to play the role of the loyal lieutenant while secretly investigating the man I had loved like a father. The first thing I did was call my brother Danny. He was the only person in the world I trusted completely, and he had always been suspicious of Jonathan in a way that used to frustrate me. When I was singing the praises of my brilliant mentor, Danny would listen quietly and then ask pointed questions about why a man like that would take such an interest in someone like me. I had dismissed his concerns as jealousy or cynicism. Now I wondered if his outsider perspective had allowed him to see what I was too close to notice. Danny drove up from Connecticut that weekend, and I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each new revelation. When I finished, he sat in silence for a long moment before speaking. I never liked him, Danny said. Remember when I met him at your promotion party? There was something in his eyes when he looked at you. I couldn't put my finger on it at the time, but now I know what it was. He looked at you like you were a tool, Marcus. A means to an end. Whatever his game is, you've been playing a part in it from the beginning. I need to know why, I said. I can't fight back until I understand what I'm fighting against. Danny leaned forward. Then we figure it out. But you need to be smart about this. You can't let him know that you know. Right now, the only advantage you have is that he thinks you're still blind. My brother was right, and his words became my guiding principle over the following months. I maintained my performance of loyal dedication while secretly building a case against the man who was building a case against me. It was exhausting, terrifying, and lonely in a way I had never experienced before. Every day, I had to look Jonathan in the eye, accept his praise, laugh at his jokes, all while knowing that he was planning my destruction. Elena became my secret ally, feeding me information as she discovered it, helping me understand the scope of what we were dealing with. But even she didn't know the full picture. None of us did. That would take time and patience, two resources I wasn't sure I had. The breakthrough came in May of 2023 from the most unexpected source imaginable, Jonathan's wife, Victoria. I had met Victoria Hartley on numerous occasions over the years. She was always present at company events, elegant and composed, the perfect complement to her charismatic husband. She ran a charitable foundation focused on educational opportunities for underprivileged youth, and I had always respected her dedication to genuine philanthropy in a world full of performative giving. We had never been close. Our interactions were limited to pleasant small talk at parties and the occasional email about charity events she wanted the company to support. So when she called me directly on a Saturday morning and asked if we could meet for coffee, I was confused but intrigued. We met at a cafe in Cambridge, far from the offices and the networks of people who might recognize us and report back to Jonathan. Victoria looked different than I had ever seen her, the usual polish stripped away to reveal a woman who was clearly struggling with something heavy. I need to ask you a question, she said after we had ordered. And I need you to tell me the truth, even if it's uncomfortable. I nodded, my heart beating faster than it should have. Are you having an affair with my husband? The question was so far from anything I had expected that I actually laughed, a short, shocked bark that drew looks from nearby tables. When I saw that she was serious, my amusement died instantly. Victoria, I'm straight. I'm not having any kind of relationship with Jonathan beyond professional. Why would you think that? She stared at me for a long moment, assessing my reaction, and something in her expression shifted. Not relief exactly, but something close to it, mixed with confusion. Because he talks about you constantly, she said. He's obsessed with you in a way that's never made sense to me. At first, I thought it was just mentorship, but it's gone beyond that. He tracks your movements, he keeps files on you, he knows things about your life that you've never told him. I've been trying to understand it for years, and the only explanation I could come up with was that there was something romantic happening that I didn't know about. Files on me. He tracked my movements. The words echoed in my mind as I tried to process what she was telling me. Victoria, I need you to tell me everything you know about those files, about whatever you've seen. It's important. She hesitated. Why? What's going on? I made a decision in that moment that could have been catastrophically wrong, but something in her eyes told me she was as much a victim of Jonathan's deception as I was, and she deserved to know the truth. Because I think your husband has been planning something for a long time, I said. And I think you and I are both part of his plan, even if we don't understand it yet. I told her about the sabotaged clients, the financial irregularities, the pattern of behavior that Elena had uncovered. I watched her face as the information landed, saw the progression from disbelief to recognition to something that looked like despair. It's happening again, she whispered. Oh God, it's happening again. Again. The word hung in the air between us. What do you mean again? Victoria's hands were shaking as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. There was someone before you, David Mercer. He was Jonathan's golden boy in the early days of the company, back before you joined. Jonathan mentored him, promoted him, gave him everything, and then, about 8 years ago, David was arrested for embezzlement. He was convicted and sent to prison. It destroyed his life, his marriage, everything. He's still serving his sentence, as far as I know. The parallels were too obvious to ignore. Jonathan set him up. I never had proof, Victoria said, but I always suspected. The way it all unfolded, the timing, the fact that Jonathan seemed almost energized by the whole process. There was something wrong about it, and now you're telling me he's doing the same thing to you. But why? What does he gain from destroying people he's claimed to care about? Victoria's expression was haunted. I've been married to Jonathan for 15 years, and I still don't fully understand him. But I've watched him long enough to recognize certain patterns. He needs to feel superior. He needs to believe he's the smartest person in any room, and when someone starts to outshine him, when they become a threat to his self-image, he has to tear them down. It's not enough for him to win. He needs them to lose everything. I thought about my trajectory at the company, how quickly I had risen, how much clients had come to trust me, how often my name was mentioned in industry publications, while Jonathan's profile faded into the background. I had always assumed he was proud of my success, that he saw it as a reflection of his mentorship. But what if it was the opposite? What if every achievement I celebrated was another mark against me in his twisted accounting? There's something else, Victoria said quietly. Something I've never told anyone. About 5 years ago, I found documents in his home office. Financial records, personal information, a kind of dossier. It wasn't just about David. There were others, going back decades. People who had worked with him, trusted him, and then had their lives destroyed by scandal or accusation. I confronted him about it, and he told me I was being paranoid, that they were just research files for a book he wanted to write about corporate psychology. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him, so I did. Do you still have access to those documents? She shook her head. He moved everything to a secure location after I found them. He said it was for privacy, but I think he knew I was suspicious. I've been locked out of his real life for years, Marcus. I live in his house, I share his bed, but I have no idea who he really is. That conversation changed everything. I was no longer just fighting to protect myself. I was fighting against a pattern of destruction that had claimed victims I had never met. and would claim more in the future if I didn't find a way to stop it. David Mercer was rotting in prison for a crime he didn't commit. His life sacrificed to Jonathan Hartley's ego. How many others were out there? How many more would there be?
I drove home from that meeting with a new sense of purpose and a new emotion burning in my chest. It wasn't just fear anymore. It wasn't just self-preservation. It was rage. Cold, patient, determined rage. Jonathan Hartley was a predator who had been hunting people for decades, hiding behind his charm and his reputation while he destroyed lives for sport. He had chosen me as his next victim, had spent years grooming me for the slaughter, probably congratulating himself on his cleverness every time I expressed gratitude for his mentorship. But he had made one critical mistake. He had underestimated me. He had looked at my background, my desperate hunger for success, my need to be accepted by someone I perceived as a father figure, and he had assumed those traits made me weak, manipulable, blind. He was about to discover how wrong he was. Over the following weeks, I assembled my team. Elena continued her financial forensics, digging deeper into the irregularities she had uncovered and searching for the trail of evidence that would prove Jonathan had fabricated everything. Victoria, despite the enormous personal risk, agreed to serve as an inside source, providing information about Jonathan's movements and accessing what files she could without arousing suspicion. Danny connected me with an old college friend who was now a private investigator, someone who could help us track down David Mercer and learn more about the other victims in Jonathan's history. And I reached out to a lawyer. Richard Okonkwo was a partner at one of Boston's most respected employment law firms, known for taking on complex cases involving executive misconduct. When I first sat down in his office and told him what was happening, he listened with the careful attention of someone who had heard many stories but recognized this one as unusual. "If what you're telling me is true," he said when I finished, "then Jonathan Hartley is one of the most sophisticated corporate predators I've ever encountered. He's not just covering his tracks. He's creating false trails that lead directly to his victims. That level of premeditation suggests a pattern of behavior, and patterns leave evidence." "That's what I'm counting on," I said. Richard nodded slowly. "I have to be honest with you, Marcus. Cases like this are difficult. The burden of proof will be on you to demonstrate not just that you didn't commit the acts you'll presumably be accused of, but that they were fabricated by someone else. That's a much higher bar than simple innocence. I understand, but I have something working in my favor that the other victims didn't have." "What's that?" "I know it's coming, and I've got time to prepare." Richard agreed to take my case on contingency, betting on the outcome rather than charging me fees I couldn't afford. In exchange, I promised him full transparency and complete access to whatever evidence we uncovered. We began meeting weekly, planning for every contingency, preparing for the storm we knew was coming. Meanwhile, my investigation into Jonathan's past started yielding results. The private investigator Danny had recommended, a sharp-eyed woman named Gina Torres, managed to track down David Mercer through his prison records. After a complicated process involving lawyers and permissions, I was able to arrange a visit. The facility was 2 hours outside of Boston, a minimum security prison for white-collar offenders that looked more like a neglected boarding school than a correctional institution. David was waiting for me in the visiting room, a man in his mid-40s with the hollowed-out look of someone who had lost everything and stopped trying to get it back. "I know why you're here," he said before I could explain myself. "You work for Jonathan. You're his new favorite. And now you've realized what he is." I nodded. "How did you know?" "Because I've been waiting for this visit for 8 years. I knew eventually someone would come. Someone who had figured it out like I should have figured it out before it was too late." David's story confirmed everything Victoria had suggested and added horrifying new details. Jonathan hadn't just framed him for embezzlement. He had spent 3 years building the case, creating false paper trails, manipulating digital records, even forging David's signature on documents that would later be used as evidence against him. By the time the hammer fell, David's guilt appeared so overwhelming that even his own lawyer advised him to take a plea deal. "I trusted him completely," David said, his voice hollow. "He was my mentor, my friend. I thought he believed in me. And the whole time, he was setting me up to take the fall for his own theft. Because that's what it was, Marcus. He stole money from the company, and he made it look like I did it. Probably millions over the years, all hidden behind a wall of fabricated evidence pointing at me. Why didn't you fight harder? Appeal the verdict? David laughed bitterly. With what? By the time I realized what had happened, I had no money, no reputation, no credibility. Every lawyer I talked to told me the same thing. The evidence was ironclad. Even if I was innocent, I could never prove it. Jonathan had been too careful, too thorough. He had spent years building a trap that was inescapable. Maybe not inescapable, I said. Not if we can prove what he did to you and connect it to what he's doing to me. For the first time, something like hope flickered in David's eyes. You really think you can take him down? I don't think it. I know it. But I need your help. I need you to tell me everything you remember about how he operated, what he said, how the frame-up was constructed. Every detail matters. We talked for hours, David pouring out memories he had been carrying for nearly a decade, pieces of a puzzle that he had never been able to assemble because he only had his own experience to work with. But now, combined with what I knew and what Victoria had revealed, patterns began to emerge. Jonathan's methodology was sophisticated, but not infinitely variable. He used the same techniques, the same kinds of fabricated evidence, the same psychological manipulation. And that consistency was his vulnerability. When I left the prison that day, I felt the rage burning brighter than ever, but now it was focused, directed, purposeful. Jonathan Hartley had destroyed innocent people for his own benefit, and he was about to pay for every single one of them. The months that followed were the most challenging of my life. By day, I maintained my performance at Hartley & Associates, playing the role of the oblivious rising star while Jonathan continued his long game. By night, I worked with my team to gather evidence, document patterns, and build a case that would be undeniable when the time came. Elena's financial analysis became increasingly detailed, revealing not just the irregularities planted to frame me, but also the trail of Jonathan's actual theft. It was subtle, spread across years and dozens of accounts, but it was there. He had been skimming money from the company since its founding, using various schemes to redirect funds into personal accounts hidden behind layers of shell corporations. Victoria's insider access proved invaluable. She managed to gain entry to Jonathan's home office while he was traveling, and photographed documents that revealed his planning in chilling detail. There were files on me going back to before I even joined the company, notes on my psychology, my vulnerabilities, my family situation. He had identified me as a target years before I received that first email, had studied me like a specimen, chosen me for qualities he believed would make me the perfect victim. Gina Torres tracked down two more of Jonathan's former targets, people whose lives had been destroyed by scandals or accusations that bore all the hallmarks of his methodology. One had committed suicide. The other had moved to another country and changed her name, living in terror that whatever had ruined her first career might somehow find her again. When I reached out to her, she initially refused to speak with me, but eventually, she agreed to provide a written statement documenting her experience. Richard Okonkwo built our legal strategy piece by piece, preparing for a multi-front war that would be fought in courtrooms, in the media, and in the court of public opinion. He brought in colleagues who specialized in criminal law, corporate fraud, and defamation, assembling a team that could match whatever resources Jonathan might deploy in his defense. And through it all, I waited. Waited for Jonathan to make his move, to spring the trap he had been building for 6 years, because I knew that when he finally struck, he would expose himself in ways that all our investigation had not been able to achieve. His attack would be his undoing. The blow came on a Thursday morning in October of 2023. I arrived at the office to find 2 police officers waiting for me in the lobby, along with a representative from the company's external legal counsel. They had a warrant for my arrest on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. The amount in question was just under $2 million, allegedly siphoned from client accounts over a period of 3 years. I was handcuffed in front of my colleagues, walked past the desks of people I had mentored and supported, subjected to the humiliation that Jonathan had surely choreographed to maximum effect. News cameras were already waiting outside, tipped off by someone who wanted to ensure the destruction would be complete and public. But unlike David Mercer, unlike the other victims who had walked this path before me, I wasn't surprised. I wasn't broken, and I wasn't alone. Richard met me at the police station with a team of 3 other attorneys. Bail was set and posted within hours, thanks to money I had been carefully saving for exactly this purpose. And before I even left the building, our counterattack had already begun. The evidence Jonathan had planted was impressive, convincing enough to fool a casual investigation. But it wasn't designed to withstand the kind of scrutiny we had been preparing for. Elena's analysis had identified the fabricated records months ago, and we had documented the chain of creation that traced back to Jonathan's own computer access. We had time-stamped proof that documents supposedly signed by me had been created while I was on the other side of the country. We had forensic evidence of digital manipulation. We had the testimony of former victims and the pattern analysis that connected my case to a decades-long history of predation. We had everything we needed. The press conference happened 3 days after my arrest. Richard had booked a venue large enough to accommodate the media frenzy that Jonathan's accusation had created. Every major outlet was there, ready to report on the next chapter of a scandal that had already made national headlines. They expected contrition, maybe denial, certainly desperation. What they got was something none of them anticipated. I stood at the podium, facing the cameras, and I told the truth. All of it. Jonathan Hartley's decades of predatory behavior, the victims whose lives he had destroyed, the elaborate methodology he used to frame innocent people for crimes he himself had committed, the evidence we had gathered proving that my arrest was just the latest in a long line of fabricated accusations. And then Richard stepped forward with the documents that would blow the case apart. Bank records showing the real destination of the allegedly embezzled funds, accounts controlled by shell corporations tied directly to Jonathan, email correspondence in which Jonathan discussed his plans with a lawyer who had been helping him for years, testimony from Victoria Hartley about what she had witnessed and discovered, statements from David Mercer and other victims, the digital forensics proving document manipulation. It was overwhelming. It was undeniable. It was exactly the kind of dramatic exposure that the media lived for. Within hours, the story had shifted completely. I was no longer the accused. I was the victim turned vindicator, the man who had exposed one of the most sophisticated corporate predators in American business history. And Jonathan Hartley was finished. The police came for him the next morning, arresting him at his home while news helicopters circled overhead. He was charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. The evidence we had provided opened investigations that would eventually uncover even more crimes, stretching back decades and involving amounts that would take years to fully calculate. David Mercer's conviction was overturned 2 months later. He walked out of prison a free man, still damaged by what he had endured, but finally vindicated. When he called to thank me, I told him he didn't owe me anything, that we had freed each other. Victoria Hartley filed for divorce and took control of the charitable foundation, redirecting its mission toward supporting victims of corporate crime. She testified against Jonathan at trial, her composed testimony perhaps the most devastating of all the evidence presented, and I walked away from Hartley and Associates, from the career I had built on a foundation of lies, from the industry that had witnessed my humiliation and then my triumph. I walked away and never looked back. It's been a year now since Jonathan was convicted. He's serving a 15-year sentence at a federal prison, not unlike the one where David Mercer spent nearly a decade of his life. His appeals have been denied. His assets have been seized. His reputation is destroyed beyond any possibility of recovery. Some people ask me if I feel satisfied, if the revenge was worth the price I paid, if I found the closure I was looking for. Part 2. The honest answer is more complicated than any of those questions suggest. I don't feel satisfaction. What I feel is something closer to exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of someone who has been running for so long that he's forgotten what it feels like to stand still. The months of investigation, the stress of the arrest, the intensity of the legal battle, all of it took a toll that I'm still paying. There are nights when I wake up in a cold sweat, dreaming that I'm back in that lobby being handcuffed while my colleagues watch. There are moments when I doubt my own memory, wonder if maybe I imagined it all, constructed an elaborate fantasy to explain away my own failures. But then I think about David Mercer walking out of prison. I think about the woman who changed her name and moved to another country, who wrote to me after the verdict to say that for the first time in 20 years, she felt safe. I think about the people Jonathan would have destroyed if I hadn't stopped him, the future victims who will now never have to experience what we experienced. And I know that it was worth it. Not because revenge is sweet, but because justice matters, because truth matters, because some wrongs are so profound that they cannot be allowed to stand unchallenged. My brother Danny helped me move to Portland last summer. I'm working as a consultant now, independent, choosing my own clients and my own terms. It's quieter than the life I used to live, less prestigious, less exciting. But it's mine, built on nothing but my own abilities and my own relationships, untainted by the manipulation of someone who saw me as a means to an end. My mother finally heard the full story a few months ago. I had been keeping the worst of it from her, not wanting to add stress to her recovery. But she saw the news coverage, put the pieces together, and demanded answers. When I told her everything, she cried. Not for me, but for the man I had believed Jonathan to be, the father figure she thought had been watching out for her son. She mourned the loss of that illusion, even as she celebrated my survival. The card Jonathan sent her is no longer on her dresser. She burned it the day after our conversation, and I think it was the right decision. Ellen Vance left Hartley and Associates before the company collapsed. She's working at a major accounting firm now, using the skills she developed uncovering Jonathan's crimes to help other organizations identify and prevent fraud. We stay in touch, meeting for coffee when I'm in Boston, two survivors of a war that most people never knew was being fought. Victoria and I have become unlikely friends. There's a bond that forms between people who have seen the truth behind a monster's mask, a shared understanding that can't be replicated with anyone who wasn't there. She's rebuilding her life, finding purpose in work that actually helps people, trying to atone for years of unknowing complicity in her husband's crimes. And Richard Okonkwo has become something like a mentor to me. Ironic, given how badly my previous mentor relationship turned out. He checks in regularly, offers guidance when I'm struggling, reminds me that survival is an ongoing process rather than a destination. If you had told me 5 years ago that my boss would become my enemy, that the man I trusted most in the world was systematically planning my destruction, I would never have believed you. I was too hungry for approval, too desperate for the validation of a father figure, too blind to the warning signs that now seem so obvious in retrospect. But I believe it now. I've lived through it. And I've come out the other side with something I never had before. A clear understanding of my own strength, my own value, my own ability to face the worst that life can throw at me and not just survive, but triumph. Jonathan Hartley thought he knew me. He thought he had analyzed my psychology, identified my vulnerabilities, predicted my every move. He was so confident in his superiority that he never considered the possibility that I might be smarter than he gave me credit for, more resilient than he expected, more capable of the same cold patience that he had weaponized against so many others. He underestimated me, and that underestimation cost him everything. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust another mentor, another boss, another authority figure who claims to have my best interests at heart. The scars Jonathan left are deep, and some wounds never fully heal. But I know this. I am not a victim. I am not a patsy. I am not a tool to be used and discarded by someone who sees other human beings as pieces on a chessboard. I am Marcus Reed. I survived. I fought back, and I won. That's my story. That's the truth of how my boss turned into my enemy, and how I turned that enemy into a cautionary tale for anyone who thinks they can destroy innocent people without consequence. The story continues now in ways that are less dramatic but perhaps more meaningful. I'm building something new, something honest, something that belongs entirely to me. And every day that I wake up free, every client I serve with integrity, every relationship I build on a foundation of genuine trust is a victory. Not over Jonathan Hartley specifically. That victory was won in the courtroom. No, these daily victories are over the version of myself that once needed someone like Jonathan to feel complete. I'm whole now in a way I never was during those years of desperate seeking. I don't need a father figure because I've become my own source of guidance. I don't need approval because I've learned to value my own judgment. I don't need to be chosen because I've chosen myself. That's what Jonathan never understood. He thought my hunger for validation was a weakness to be exploited. But it was also the source of my determination, my resilience, my refusal to accept the destruction he had planned for me. The same qualities that made me vulnerable to his manipulation also made me capable of fighting back with everything I had. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder what he thinks about in his prison cell. Does he understand what went wrong? Where his plans fell apart? How he underestimated the very person he thought he knew so completely? Does he feel regret for what he did, or only regret that he was caught? Does he still believe he was superior, or has reality finally penetrated the armor of his narcissism? I'll probably never know. And honestly, I'm not sure I care anymore. What I care about is the future. What I care about is making sure that the next chapter of my life is written by me, not by someone who sees me as a pawn in their personal game. What I care about is living with integrity, with honesty, with the kind of authenticity that was impossible during those years when I was performing a role I didn't even know I had been assigned. My brother Danny calls every Sunday now, a tradition we started after everything fell apart. He says he's proud of me, and I believe him because Danny has never been one for empty compliments. My mother sends care packages filled with the cookies she used to make when I was a child, her way of saying what she can't put into words. My friends, the real ones who stuck by me during the darkest days, have become more precious to me than any professional achievement ever could. I've started writing, actually. Not about what happened with Jonathan, not directly, but about the experience of trust and betrayal, about the ways we make ourselves vulnerable to people who don't deserve our vulnerability, about the long road back from the kind of devastation that destroys everything you thought you knew about yourself and your world. Maybe someday it will become a book. Maybe it will just remain private, a way for me to process and understand. Either way, it's mine. That word keeps coming back to me. Mine. For so many years, nothing felt truly mine. My career was built on Jonathan's foundation. My success was filtered through his approval. My identity was shaped by his perception of who I was and who I should be. Now, finally, I am my own creation. It's terrifying. It's also liberating in ways I never could have anticipated. If there's a lesson in all of this, and I'm not sure there is because life rarely offers neat conclusions, it might be this. Trust is not weakness, but blind trust is dangerous. Wanting a mentor, a guide, someone to believe in you, those are natural and healthy desires, but they must be balanced by the willingness to see clearly, to question, to notice when something feels wrong, even if you can't articulate why. I ignored warnings that I should have heeded. I dismissed concerns from people who cared about me because I didn't want to face the implications. I chose comfortable illusion over uncomfortable truth, and I nearly paid for that choice with my freedom, my reputation, and my future. But I also trusted my own perception when the evidence became undeniable. I built alliances with people who shared my commitment to truth. I was patient when every instinct screamed for immediate action. I played the long game against a master of long games, and I won. Those choices saved me. They weren't easy choices. They were terrifying and isolating and demanded more from me than I thought I had to give. But they were mine. And in the end, That's what made the difference. Jonathan Hartley will spend the next 15 years behind bars, maybe more if the additional charges that are still being filed result in convictions. His assets have been seized, his reputation destroyed, his family shattered. He lost everything that mattered to him, everything he spent decades acquiring through manipulation and theft and the systematic destruction of innocent people. I don't know if that's justice. True justice would mean that David Mercer never spent a day in prison. It would mean that the woman who changed her name and fled the country never had to fear for her safety. It would mean that the victim who took his own life was still alive, enjoying the vindication he never got to see. But it's something. Consequences. Accountability. The truth finally dragged into the light after years of being hidden behind charm and manipulation and fabricated evidence. It's something. And for now, something is enough. I'm sitting on my balcony in Portland as I finish this story, watching the sun set over the city I've made my new home. The air is cool and clean, carrying the scent of pine from the mountains in the distance. My phone is quiet. My mind is quiet. For the first time in years, I don't feel like I'm waiting for the next blow to fall. This is what peace feels like, I think. Not the absence of memory, but the integration of it. Not forgetting what happened, but placing it in proper perspective. Not pretending the scars don't exist, but wearing them as evidence of survival. I survived. I fought back. I won. And now, finally, I get to live. Some wounds never fully heal, but they can become part of who you are instead of defining everything about you. Jonathan Hartley marked me in ways I'll carry forever. But those marks are mine now, transformed from weapons of destruction into testimony of endurance. He thought he was creating a victim. Instead, he created an adversary. He thought he was eliminating a threat. Instead, he awakened one. He thought he knew who I was, what I was capable of, how I would respond to his carefully planned assault. He was wrong about everything.
And that wrongness, that fundamental failure to understand who he was really dealing with, is what cost him his freedom, his fortune, and his future. I don't celebrate his downfall. I don't take pleasure in his suffering. What I feel is more complex than satisfaction, more nuanced than victory. I feel the weight of all the people he hurt, the lives he destroyed, the potential he extinguished. I feel grief for the mentor I thought I had, the relationship I believed was real, the trust that turned out to be a weapon aimed at my heart. But I also feel grateful. Grateful that I woke up in time. Grateful for the people who helped me, who risked their own safety to stand against a predator who had escaped consequences for decades. Grateful for the chance to rebuild, to start again, to create a life that belongs entirely to me. The story of how my boss became my enemy is not a story about revenge. Not really. It's a story about truth. About the power of reality to cut through illusion, no matter how carefully constructed. About the strength that comes from facing the worst in someone you loved and refusing to look away. Jonathan Hartley built lies. I tore them down. That's the simplest summary of what happened between us. But nothing is ever really simple, and the echoes of what he did will reverberate through countless lives for years to come. The company he built has collapsed. The industry he helped shape is reckoning with questions about how someone like him could operate for so long without detection. The victims he created are still healing, will perhaps never fully heal, and I am still becoming whoever I'm going to be on the other side of all this. That's the work that continues now, not the dramatic work of investigation and confrontation and courtroom battle. The quieter work of rebuilding a self that was damaged by years of manipulation, of learning to trust again without being naive, of figuring out what I want from a life that is finally, truly mine. I don't know what comes next. I don't have a 5-year plan or a clear vision of the future. For someone who spent his entire adult life striving towards specific goals, that uncertainty used to feel terrifying. Now it feels like freedom. Because whatever happens, I know I can handle it. I've proven that to myself in the most difficult way possible. I faced a predator who had destroyed everyone who came before me, and I survived. More than survived. I won. That knowledge lives in my bones now, available whenever I need it. It's the foundation on which everything else will be built. The sun has set while I've been talking. The city lights are coming on below me, a glittering grid of other lives, other stories, other struggles I know nothing about. Somewhere out there, someone else is facing their own betrayal, their own enemy, their own impossible challenge. I wish I could tell them what I know, that they're stronger than they think, that the truth has power, that patience and preparation can overcome even the most sophisticated adversary, that survival is possible even when it seems impossible. But everyone has to learn these things for themselves. Everyone has to walk their own path through the darkness before they can find their way back to light. I walked mine. I'm still walking it, really. The journey doesn't end when the villain is defeated, despite what the stories tell us. The journey continues, changes shape, becomes something new. And that's okay. That's what life is. An ongoing process of becoming, of learning, of growing past what tried to destroy us. Jonathan Hartley tried to destroy me. He failed, and in failing, he gave me something I never would have found any other way, a complete understanding of my own resilience, my own capabilities, my own worth. Maybe that's the ultimate irony. In trying to break me, he made me unbreakable. In trying to take everything I had, he helped me discover what no one could ever take away. I am Marcus Reed. My boss became my enemy, and I turned that enemy into a lesson about the power of truth, the importance of justice, and the unbreakable strength of someone who has been pushed to the edge and refused to fall. This is my story, all of it. Every painful detail and every hard-won victory. I've held nothing back because the truth deserves to be told completely, without softening or evasion. And now that it's told, I can finally let it go, not forget it, because you never forget something like this, but release my grip on it. Stop letting it define every moment of my existence. Make room for whatever comes next. The hardest part isn't the betrayal. The hardest part isn't the fight. The hardest part is the after, when the adrenaline fades and you're left with the reality of what happened and what it means. But I'm learning to navigate that too, one day at a time, one moment at a time, building a new life in the space where the old one used to be. Jonathan is in prison. The truth is out. The victims are vindicated, and I am free. That's how this story ends. Not with a dramatic climax, but with the quiet continuation of a life that almost didn't get to continue at all, with gratitude and grief and hope and healing, all mixed together in a way that defies simple description. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know I'll face it as myself, fully and honestly, without the shadow of someone else's expectations darkening my path. That's victory, that's justice, that's the revenge that actually matters. Living well, living free, living true, and never ever forgetting what it cost to get here.